Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Future Space podcast, the video podcast. Today we have Alice Carruth. She's a public relation coordinator for Spaceport America. Alice, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you, Daniel. It's good to be here.
We're going to start today in the same way that we start all the other interviews. I want you to give me three words that describe space.
Three words. Vast,
Three
I
words.
think is the first one. Space is vast.
Yes.
Space is awesome in the original terminology of what you'd think is awesome. And I would say space is exciting. They're my three words.
Vast, awesome, and expensive. No,
Exciting.
exciting. There we go. Now, there's a
Also
lot
expensive.
of there's a lot of discussions about why we're going to space, and I guess one of the questions that a lot of people are trying to figure out out there is really the why. Why is it important for us? What are the benefits? You've been at the spaceport. You've been kind of ground zero of departure to space. From your perspective, why is it so important for us to go there?
It's limitless, really, when it comes to what potential space has. I think we focus a lot on this idea of millionaires or billionaires and a space race, but what people lose sight of is how much we learn from space, how much it's actually added to us on here on Earth. I'm sure that most people who watch or listen to your podcast are using cell phones, they're connecting to the internet. They're probably scattered around the globe just as you are, you and I are, and they're interconnected because of developments in space. I very recently had a bit of a run-in with somebody who kept saying to me, I don't understand why we have a spaceport in New Mexico when we should be doing more to conserve our planet. Do you not know about global warming and climate change? And I had to say, yes, ma'am, I know a lot about it because of the work that NASA does. And
Right.
I think people really forget that we're learning a lot about what happens on our planet because we are in space. And that's why I think it's important for us to go to space. I think it's really important that we are studying what's out there. And I know from science experiments that are constantly being used on the International Space Station and in suborbital launches from places like Spaceport America, that those technology, that kind of experimentation cannot be performed in our gravitational environment. But in that microgravity environment, they're able to excel that kind of understanding, that data gathering that you just cannot achieve here on Earth. So there's multifaceted reasons of why we go to space. And I think it's very beneficial for most of us here on Earth.
Now, beyond the technology and the science, what do you think is the human story of going to space?
I
Um,
think that's a really good question. You know, there's only been about 600 people plus that have gone to space since the 1960s, and that's such a tiny fraction of the world population. And yet, all of them have come back with the same story of the overview effect. And I know you've spoken to Frank White
yeah.
before, and I do think that that's a huge part of it. And I work very closely with a man called Dr. Churchill, Chris Churchill, who's at NMSU, the New Mexico University here in Las Cruces, and he studies astronomy, and he talks about this innate ability for us, a need even to travel and explore. It's gone back through humankind. We've done it for many centuries, and it's only inevitable for us to then look to the skies as the next part that we need to go and figure out and explore and give us an understanding then of our planet. Every single astronaut you speak to that talks about the overview effect finds a deeper connection to Earth, an understanding of how precious our planet is, how there aren't borders, how connected they feel, even though they are 250 miles plus circling around our planet. So I think that's really what comes down to why humans have a need to explore space. It's actually really to explore us as a race and as a human species.
We're ambassadors for life, and life is always seeking to go to new places. And if it doesn't go to these places, it's not because it doesn't want to, it's because it can't. And whether it was the mountain or the ocean or the sky, there's always been this like desire to push the boundaries and to go to the next place. And now that we have the technology, of course, from the perspective of the Earth that's been waiting for this time for 4.6 billion years, when for the when the species now has the capacity to take life into a multi-planetary, it's almost like the single cell, billions of years ago on Earth, the single cell that is just about to become multi-cell organism, and the planet is that single cell that's just about to become so much more. I think that's like it's connected to this force of life that is, for us started on Earth, but is meant to go way beyond just the Earth.
Absolutely. And you can see it from how many people have already signed up for these suborbital flights that are being offered by Virgin Galactic at Spaceport America, Blue Origin, just down the road in Van Horn, Texas, and possibly with SpaceX coming up in the next few years as well. Civilian people that want to have that experience and feel connected again. And I think people lose sight of that because they think it's just at the moment for the rich and famous, which it is, but all transportation starts off in the same vein. It happened with the railroad, it happened with the car. I do think eventually it's going to become more accessible to the everyday civilians like you and I. And I think most people would take that opportunity to go and feel what it's like to have that overview effect, what it's like to feel connected again back to Earth. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what effect that has on us as a human race.
I mean, the billionaires, it's never their priorities to be able to convey the artistry of these groundbreaking innovation. Their purpose in that equation is to create opportunities and fun innovation when at the beginning no one else can do it. But the important thing is for them to tap into the people who can who can communicate the story. And obviously, William Shatner was an example of that. But getting artists, and that was one of I guess the success of the Renaissance, where the people with the money and the power back then saw and recognized the power of storytelling through artists. So they would fund and they would support the artists to create and to tell the vision of the future. And Richard Branson has been doing an amazing job. And you started to mention about the spaceport, and now already all these people lining up for Virgin Galactic. Spaceport has been kind of like ground zero, along with Florida, obviously, but like creating that little world where you are. Tell us the story of Spaceport and how it was last year for the groundbreaking flight, and where you're going next.
So Spaceport America is the world's first purpose-built commercial spaceport. And yes, we are home to the anchor tenant of Virgin Galactic, but we have multiple customers that use the spaceport facilities, and we're owned entirely by the state of New Mexico. And the reason why New Mexico took this plunge into creating a commercial spaceport is to do with the history of space here. Space is something that's been going on since the 1930s, when Robert Goddard first moved down to New Mexico to utilize our airspace for his early rocketry testing. And then the V2 rockets were tested from White Sands Proving Ground, which is now White Sands Missile Range. So we are known as the birthplace of the US space program. NASA has been here since the 1960s, both with the White Sands Test Facility and with the TDRS system, which ground base is here at the White Sands Complex. We've been used by NASA for training for astronauts from, I think it was Apollo 16 onwards, who've come to New Mexico and done a lot of training in Kilburn Hole, for example, just outside of Las Cruces. And we've also been a very popular place for astronomy. Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto, actually spent the last 50 years of his life living here in Las Cruces and established the NMSU Astronomy Department. So with all of that information about southern New Mexico and having all our national labs here in Sandia and Los Alamos and up at Kirtland, which is the Air Force National Lab as well, they decided we've got the knowledge base of people here in New Mexico to create a commercial spaceport. So this program started some 30 years ago when they started to explore the idea of having a commercial spaceport. They actually had the first launch back in 2006. So we predate everything that's gone on in the last couple of years with Virgin Galactic. In fact, there's been over 300 launches of rockets from Spaceport America since 2006. So last year was Huge for us because part of establishing a commercial spaceport was to have a foundational anchor tenant, which is Virgin Galactic.
Yeah.
They moved their operations here in 2019, and they have about 180 people now that are living and working in New Mexico. So it was a huge moment for the state to actually have that payoff and return. We knew that it was going to happen. It was obviously delayed. We understand that space is very difficult, as I'm sure you do as well. And those delays were for the right reason. They had to do the right investigation after the crash. They had to make sure that those space planes, because there's two of them, are in the top condition. They were able to prove that their glider system worked very safely and efficiently. And they had the first test with humans on board in May of 2021, and then the test with Virgin Galactic's founder, Sir Richard Branson, in July of last year. And your question about what that event was like, it was pretty incredible, to say the least, to be a witness to that part of history unfolding. It'd been a long time coming, like I say, in the state, and we were hoping for an enormous party, but COVID certainly slowed that progress down, and we only had about 500 people on site at that time. But everybody there was enthralled. He'd invited local students from the schools. He'd invited local media. He really made it a family environment. So a lot of the people that had been involved in this whole project from the beginning, the likes of Loretta Whitesides, who I know you know well as well,
Yeah.
and George were there, who had been part of this project since the first thought of back in, I think they were 2004 when they first formed. So it was a long time coming, and a great relief for everybody for such a huge success, but also such incredible excitement. I think the words Spaceport America were found across social media over 900 billion times in 1 month. So everybody around the globe was talking about this, and that has a huge impact on such a small state as New Mexico. We might be the 5th largest when it comes to geography here, but we've actually got a really tiny population, and even a lot of Americans here don't know that we're part of the United States. So it was a real great moment for us to finally be on that world stage and say, look, we've achieved what we set out to do. It might have taken a little bit longer, but we definitely got there, and we had a great opportunity for our state to move forward with a future of commercial aerospace.
I mean, it's amazing how within our lifetime we went from something that was totally science fiction to now we have several players that are making it happen. And obviously Richard Branson was one of the leaders in promoting that vision and pushing and putting all the effort. Yesterday I was at the California Science Center with Loretta. We were looking for the space for Year's Night that's going to be happening on April 9th. And we were at the hangar where the Endeavour space shuttle is. And both of us were like super emotional and imagining a moment that's coming in soon where there's going to be this museum of these several the evolution of spaceship, the Endeavour, the Virgin. They're all going to be in this kind of like our journey into space museum. It's happening. It's there. Maybe it's going to be at the Spaceport. What do you think?
I think that'd be wonderful. I mean, Virgin Galactic already use what they call the DNA of space, going from the Wright brothers all the way through the evolution of aircraft into what is now Spaceship Two, which they use. I think it's exciting to see that. I mean, you and I grew up in Europe. It was not even in the realm of what a career opportunity would have been for a girl like me, who grew up just outside of London. And yet here I am in my 30s, living in New Mexico, working as part of this incredible new commercial space that started from here, from the ground up. And I do feel very excited and very privileged to be witness of that. And beyond what Virgin are doing, I see all the other tenants that work at Spaceport America and see how they develop systems that then go from suborbital testing to go onto the International Space Station. Spin launch are revolutionizing the way we are launching objects into space with kinetic energy. Our environment are creating a whole new satellite system, which will be a cell tower in the sky that is completely solar powered, so that it won't be taking anything away and causing carbon problems in our atmosphere. There's some really revolutionary things going on at spaceports across the whole country and around the world. We're one of 13 now that are commercially licensed here in the US. and we're part of the Global Spaceport Alliance that works with other spaceports around the globe. And we're looking in the future at how we're going to be able to do point-to-point spaceport travel. And it is going to happen. There are already companies working on brand new hypersonic vehicles that will be able to launch from Spaceport America and land in China a couple of hours later, which is just an incredible thing to think of. And yeah, you'd asked me 35 years ago if this was even possible. I would have laughed at your face. And that was a young, inspirational person that you would have been speaking to. So it's incredible that we've managed to get this far in just such a short space of time. Even looking at the whole grand scheme of thing of 600 people that have flown since the 60s, that's actually really quite a short space of time in humankind when you think about it, of how far we've gone from sending man up into space, sending man to the moon, and now making it a commercial, viable launch system that we can all participate in. Yeah. It's expensive right now, but as more and more companies make it available, it will become more accessible to all of us, which is a really exciting prospect, I think, for humans.
It's always been the cycle of these innovations, whether it's a cell phone or the car or plane. I mean, the first cell phone was like $10,000 per. It was a massive big brick. I remember my father had it. They had to be in the car first because the reception was better because the unit was bigger, and now everybody carries it in their pocket, and it's not even a question. You mentioned a little bit about obviously growing up in Europe. Tell us your journey from growing up in Europe. Did you, from an early age, wanted to be in space, or did you just kind of happen to find yourself, in New Mexico and just like, I have no idea how I got here, but here I am. What is your journey that led you to Spaceport?
Definitely the latter scenario. So I grew up just outside of London, and I left in my early 20s to move to the Middle East. And I worked in television. So I was a broadcaster in news production, and I'd worked in brand content management for radio and television prior to that. And I met my husband, who's an American, who works for the US government, and he took a position here for White Sands Missile Range as an engineer. So that's how I ended up here. It was purely by luck. And I started freelancing here and got to know the aerospace industry and the history, and was hooked. I think I've always been a sci-fi fan. If you speak to any of my family, they'll tell you that I was obsessed with Star Trek and Stargate growing up, and always loved the idea of science fiction all of a sudden becoming science fact. And the more I delved into learning about the history of this area, the more I became absolutely hooked on the idea of wanting to get involved. So I started off working with the Las Cruces Space Festival that's been running now it's the 5th time coming up this April. It's a community event. Everything we do is free, and the idea is to make space more accessible to people, because this is quite a low-income community, and it becomes quite an expensive hobby to have, a hobby even to have. So we tried to make something that would be great for this community, but also to attract people here so we can show off that space history that's in this region. And then after starting that for a few years, I got involved with a local company called Solstar Space that do Wi-Fi communications for rockets. And then I ended up at Spaceport America starting in 2020, and I've been here since, and feel, like I say, very privileged to be on the front line, being able to be witness to all the great things that have happened in the last couple of years here in New Mexico.
So your family is not surprised at all?
My family kind of were a bit confused at first, but having moved to the Middle East and now to the US, I think they're quite used to me being quite far away from Europe. But the concept of working in commercial aerospace is quite alien to them. They don't really understand the whole business plan of it or how it's going to work. But the more time they're going to come out here and the more they get to see, which they haven't been able to do since I've started because of the pandemic, I think they'll be won over quite quickly and recognise that this is a really cool industry for me to be part of. I know they certainly did when my daughter was able to meet Richard Branson before his flight last July. It was very fortunate that her class was chosen to be the one that was able to be witness, and he was very, very involved with them being part of his day. They even wrote postcards to him, which he read when he came back from space, and was able to really feel connected to these local students. So I think very quickly people will start to recognise what a great industry this is and how viable it's going to be moving forward, because there's still a lot of question about how, the long-term goal and strategy of this. And that's pretty much my job. You touched earlier about your piece that you did about space needing artists and storytellers. That's exactly what I see myself as. I am a journalist by trade, but really I'm a storyteller. And this story is something that's so easy to tell and so exciting that it's a real easy sell for me to be able to talk about it and be excited about it. And I think the more people learn about why Spaceport America is here, about the space history in New Mexico, and about the long-term goals of spaceports around the globe and the US, I think people will then start to fall on board and start to recognize what an exciting time we are living in.
So tell us a little bit more about that vision and the long-term strategies, the plan for spaceport. Like beyond, I think most of the people think of spaceport as the base for Virgin Galactic. There's obviously so many more people. You've touched on some of the players or the participants that are at the present over there at spaceports. But can you elaborate a little bit more about what's coming for this year and the years following?
Sure. So yeah, it's confusing having a Brit being the spokesperson for Spaceport America and not being an employee of Virgin Galactic. But spaceports are, you think of it like an airport. We are a location for all vehicles that travel above the normal passenger plane height of 40,000 feet. So we have multiple vehicles that operate out at Spaceport America. On the north end of the campus, we have Air Environment's Sunglider, which is a 262-foot wingspan unmanned aerial craft which operates as a cell tower in the sky, and it's being developed by SoftBank, the Japanese investment group, and Air Environment, which is the largest supplier of unmanned vehicles to the US military. And they're creating a completely green new technology that I said is powered completely by the sun, that flies around in the stratosphere and is able to give a 200 radius or a 200 kilometer radius cell tower connection below. So it could be used for disasters. If all of a sudden all the cell tower power is knocked out on the ground, they can send up one of these planes instantly over a disaster zone and create correct connectivity, and could also be able to be a great option for rural areas that aren't able to get fiber connections on the ground. So it's an exciting technology, and it flies around 80,000. So again, it has to be tested in a an aerospace that's not going to be problematic for people. And that's one of the great things about Spaceport America. We have access to 6,000 square miles of restricted airspace that's controlled by the government. It's the most restricted airspace in the whole country except for a small square above the US White House. So it's exciting that we're able to get a lot of technology doing research and development in our area because they're not able to do it elsewhere, and they can then be FAA certified to fly over populated areas. So that's one of our great vehicles that we have at Spaceport America. We have a more traditional rocket customer down in our vertical launch area called Up Aerospace. They do launches up to about 77 miles up. They tend to do a lot of work with NASA's Flight Opportunities program, taking up payloads for research. They also do Celestis, which take ashes up into space for people that have lost loved ones. So they are a really exciting customer. They've done about 15 launches with us since 2006. So a very good long-term customer of Spaceport America. And then right down on the south side, we have Spin Launch, who I've told you created the world's largest evacuated centrifuge. It's the size of the Statue of Liberty. So it's an enormous disc out in the middle of the desert, and they're building up a completely new way of launching objects to space with kinetic energy. So within the vacuum chamber, they're able to build up a speed of around Mach 1.4, 1.5 at the moment, and then launch objects into space without using a huge consumption of fuel, which we all know is what's a big part of space at the moment. So we have some really exciting things going on at the spaceport. And on top of that, we have multiple short-term customers as well. We've had Boeing do some capsule testing with us with high-altitude balloons. We've had some various different types of rocket building, from 3D printing to student rocket launches, and we host the world's largest intercollegiate rocket engineering competition called the Spaceport America Cup. So that's coming up in June this year. So we've got some really cool things that are happening right here on our doorstep on a regular basis.
So there's not a boring day at spaceport. People think it's a desert and it's like nothing happens over there unless there's like going to space. But there's stuff going on every day.
Absolutely. I think if we had a boring day, it'd become as a surprise to those of us that work at the spaceport. It's difficult because a lot of the time I can't talk about the customers that are doing their research and development because it's a highly competitive industry. And also, they don't want any of their industry secrets being escaped outside of the US. So we have to be quite careful at protecting their brand and identity. But certainly, it's never a quiet day at the spaceport, whether I'm doing STEM outreach one day, launching another day. Sometimes I have car companies coming out and doing aerodynamic testing on our 12,000 by 200-foot runway. It really depends on what happens on a day-to-day basis out there, but all of it is very exciting and innovative. And that's pretty much the pillars of what we're hoping spaceports are going to be. And back to what you're thinking of long-term goals of the spaceport, we are hoping to get more and more customers operating out here because they can then have access to this wonderful airspace you can't find elsewhere for testing and research and development. But we're also hoping we're going to become partners with all the other spaceports around the globe. I work very closely with spaceports in UK, with Ecuador, Brazil, Japan. We've spoken to spaceports in Australia. We're hoping one day there is going to be a network of spaceports, just like there is a network of airports, and you'll have spaceport to spaceport travel via space, which again will start off as a very expensive idea, but eventually will be something that will be far more accessible to all of us.
Now, first of all, I didn't know that there were spaceports in Australia, UK, Ecuador, Brazil. I mean, it's where in UK first? UK is so tight. Where is the spaceport?
There are actually two in the United Kingdom. There's Spaceport down in Cornwall, which is actually part of the Newquay airport system, and they're going to be having a Virgin Orbit launch from there later this year, so there'll be the first launch from UK soil. And then
Wow.
Saxiford, which is up in the Scottish, I believe it's in the Shetland Islands, is going to be operating with more of a vertical rocket launch customer. So it's going to be exciting to see them develop over there. And yes, there are spaceports in Italy. I believe there's one up in the northern parts. One of I think it might be Switzerland that has their own, or Sweden. I do apologize, I can't remember. But yeah, they're popping up all over the world because people are starting to see how great it will be to have a spaceport nearby for new economic development, for new opportunity for research and development, and for accessibility in the future. So you're going to see people doing less launches from the European Space Agency through French Guiana unless they're going orbital, but
Yeah.
instead they'll go and do the testing at spaceports in other locations around Europe. So it's exciting to see that they're popping up all over the place. And I believe there's a couple of maps out there where you can see all the different spaceports that are registered around the globe. And like I say, the FAA has licensed 13 spaceports in the US and more are on the books as well.
Wow. Well, we'll make sure to have the link in the comments for to have access to that map. I was in a previous episode with astronaut Nicole Stott. She was sharing with us how, of all her years at NASA, the biggest lesson that she took away was not the science or the technology. It was really from the people, the human experience, working with people that just are constantly pushing the boundaries. I know that at Spaceport, there's a big team of people. Um, Tell us about that team. How incredible are they?
We're actually a really small team. There's only 22 of us currently that run the entire spaceport and cover the 18,000 acres that we have out here in the desert. And they are all very passionate and very dedicated to their job. And I think that's really what keeps us going every single day. I get to work with the likes of Dr. Bill Gutman, who has been part of the spaceports for some 20 to 30 years now, both in the research that started, before it even established and since it's been launching in 2006. And he's also a great STEM educator. He has an incredible way of making space relatable and exciting to all ages, and is an absolute delight to work with, along with Dr. Chaz Miller, who's our aerospace engineer, who again is a great STEM educator and has his PhD in astronomy and has such an incredible passion for space and for people to understand why we are traveling to it. And beyond that, the rest of our team, like I say, are so passionate about what we do. We work long hours tirelessly to support our customers. We want people to have a great experience, but beyond that, we want people to really know a little bit more about us. learn about our history here in New Mexico, and promote us as a viable place for people to come to. I sometimes get into conferences and people are just very quizzical. Why does New Mexico have a spaceport? Why don't people just go to Florida or to Mojave? And it's great to engage with people like that, but I want it to be more of a common knowledge of why New Mexico is here. And when I start talking about White Sands or White Sands Test Facility, which is NASA's area, they sort of go, oh yeah, I've heard of those guys, just never realized that they were in New Mexico. So it's good for us to promote our state. I'm an adoptee of New Mexico. I'm very proud. So it's always nice to be an ambassador for the state down here. It's a really good place to come and live and a great place for aerospace.
Now, you mentioned earlier about your daughter being present when Richard Branson went up, and then there was a class. Um, how I think it's for the young generation, the children. It is so important for them to experience, not just listen about it, but to experience it. How is spaceport? Is it fairly accessible for a school or for a STEM organization to reach out to you and say, you know what, we would like to bring the kids and see what it's like?
So we're becoming more and more accessible is the answer to that one to make it easier. It's difficult. We can't have people out there all day, every day. Some launches aren't able to have spectators, for example. We do work with a tour company that provides tours on weekends, but Monday through Friday, I have dropped the price to zero to all New Mexico schools, and I will happily take them around and give them a good tour of the spaceport and explain what it is we do and talk about our careers. And we also work with a couple of great other companies, 501c3s like the Las Cruces Space Festival that do events here in the community, which is actually sponsored by the United Way of Southwest New Mexico. And we, during the pandemic, took our STEM education online and worked with the NMSU STEM Outreach Centre to come up with at-home activities so that people that were stuck at home and couldn't go out and buy supplies were able to do science experiments with things that they could find around the house. Because you're right, it's very important for young children to be able to have access to space and access to science. Particularly when everything went virtual, they stopped having that hands-on experience, which I think was really quite a devastating loss to the science community. So we're doing our best to make sure we rectify that as much as possible now. I was doing lots of virtual tours of Spaceport America and presentations during the pandemic, and we will continue to be as accessible to those as possible. It really is dependent on what my schedule is with other launches that happen, but I probably do at least one STEM outreach program a week at the moment. So I have a school coming out on Thursday. I went into a school last week. I have another robotics group coming out on Saturday. And then we've invited a lot of these local STEM groups to participate in our open house on April the 10th. So we are doing as much as we can to make sure that people have access to the spaceport. And I mentioned earlier about the Spaceport America Cup that's coming up in June of this year. Launches are going to be inaccessible to most spectators just because we've got 2,000 people out at site, and actually having spectators beyond that is quite a difficult task when there are only 22 of us on staff. But they are going to have a day in Las Cruces where these rockets will be put on display, and the judges will be able to go around and check what the designs are like with the students and make sure that they're up to the safety standards. There's 151 teams competing in the Cup this year from 14 different countries around the world. So we encourage the public to come along to that event, which will be on June the 21st at the Las Cruces Convention Center. And then people have that hands-on experience of being able to see rockets and to speak to people that build rockets and ask them what got them involved, and to learn about the kind of schools that are going to be doing rocketry as part of their curriculum. And we're really excited to say for the first time this year, we've actually got 4 local schools involved in the Cup. NMSU, UNM, New Mexico Tech and UTEP are all competing on a world stage. And I think partly a lot of that is to do with the fact that they have access to a spaceport on their doorstep. And I don't think the funding for that kind of education would be available to these schools without it. So we're excited to be part of that, and making sure that people do have some kind of methodology so that they can go to school here in the state, get hands-on experience, and then get a good career in aerospace afterwards, because that's part of the pathway cycle that we need to make sure we're holding the future generations' hands and guiding them through.
It is part of the work that I'm doing with Space 110, where I intend to start taking young 16-year-old explorers to the edge of space aboard Space Perspective. But besides the winners, the selected group who's going to go up, you have all these children that show up with a desire to be part of it. They're showing up with an interest. And when you're young, often in your career, and as you shared with your own path, where you end up going is not necessarily where you started with your interest, is where there was someone around you to facilitate it, or it was less friction going in that place. So what is important is to create an environment that has less friction between the interest and the actualization of where they want to go. And by creating opportunities like what you're doing, it's amazing. Is there a link for a website for what's going to happen on the cup?
Yes, it's called SpaceportAmericaCup.com, so people can go on there and learn a bit more about the event. It's sponsored by some incredible companies. Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Sierra Nevada Corporation are all part of our sponsors. And so it's an opportunity to also speak to the recruiters at that event at the Las Cruces Convention Center, because they're all there to see these students and to watch them and give them opportunities. But even those that are younger or perhaps hadn't started, like you say, in their career path to become part of the aerospace industry, have an opportunity then to go and speak to these recruiters and say, well, what is it you're looking for? How do we get involved? What would be my next step to be able to get a career in aerospace? And they're really the ones that would be great to be able to speak to on a one-on-one basis. And I'm excited to say that, the likes of Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic have some incredible STEM outreach opportunities and internships, which I think are really important for people to learn about. So I believe Club for the Future is the Blue Origin group, and they do some really cool postcards to space, which I think is an incredible opportunity for students to be able to create postcard, send it up on one of their suborbital flights, and then get a piece of space come back to them, which I think is just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for them. And Galactic Unite, which is Virgin Galactic's STEM outreach program, do great internships, sponsorship of people's education. They also do in-classroom presentations, and they're a really great group to work with as well. So I know SpaceX has done the same thing, and a lot of the other corporations are doing the same as well, and that's what I think is really exciting. And we're doing our best to work together much more and more, because it's such a vast group of people we want to reach the more we work together. And that's part of what I do for the Global Spaceport Alliance. I run the Academic Partnership Outreach Group, which is how I work with the UK and Ecuador and Japan. We're doing as much as we can to make space more accessible to everybody. And I would say to anybody who's interested in aerospace, get in contact with your local spaceport. There's a lot of them out there, and we all want to help you as much as possible. Be patient with us. There's only a few of us that are working on a day-to-day basis, but eventually someone will always get back to you and try and help you out.
How excited are you for your daughter? I mean, you grew up in a different time, and even within the last just 5 years, we've seen access for young women to open up, and there's a lot more program. And I think that for minorities, women, the future is really inspiring. How excited are you for your daughter? Or does she want to, do you think that she wants to go there?
She doesn't. She's actually more interested in art, but I'm trying to steer her as much as possible in towards space art and design, because I think that'd be a really great pathway for her. But you're right, representation really matters. I certainly didn't grow up watching women in aerospace as much as I should have been back in the early 80s. It's certainly starting to change, but it's still very much a very male-dominated industry. At the Global Spaceport Alliance meeting in January, there was 50 people in the room, 6 of them were women, only 1 of them worked at a spaceport. It's going to change in the future, and I do think having more women talk about their roles in spaceports and their roles in aerospace, because we're not just rocket scientists, we are storytellers like myself in public relations. We have a fantastic general counsel at Spaceport America who's a woman who's doing a presentation at the National Space Symposium up in Colorado Springs. So I recommend anybody who's interested in space law, look up Melissa FoS, because she's an incredible inspirational speaker when it comes to her knowledge of space law. And a young female attorney that works for Spaceport America as well. There are definitely more roles and more opportunities for women to get involved in aerospace that go beyond just your typical engineer and rocket scientist role. And I think the more we talk about that, the more the representation is there with people like myself that are able to talk on podcasts or in interviews or at panels, at events, the more I think it's exciting for the future, because people can then see themselves in the speakers. And I certainly think for her, when she came away from that experience, I don't think the gravity of it at the time really sunk in. She was only 8 years old when she got to watch Richard Branson go to space. But I think long term, I think she's going to be able to look back and think, wow, what an incredible experience. Because I know when I was a kid, I probably didn't understand the full gravity of the experience of travel that I had in Europe until I moved away from that. But I'm excited for what their future holds. And my young son is very excited about everything space. I think he's probably the one that's going to end up going into it more as an engineer and her as the storyteller. But there's definitely roles for both of them in whatever way they want to go in.
Absolutely. We need engineers and we need storytellers, creative storytellers, artists. Um, so we're gonna put the link for the cup that's gonna happen. Are you gonna be personally at the Space Symposium in Colorado coming up?
I am not. My boss will be. Scott McLaughlin, who's the executive director of Spaceport America, will be at the NSS, and there is a booth there with the New Mexico partnership to explain about aerospace across the entire state. And we're very lucky. We've actually got our Economic Development Cabinet Secretary Alicia Keys going up to this symposium to represent the state and to show people what a great opportunity they have to come to New Mexico and launch or develop or manufacture here in our state. So there's going to be a good representation at the NSS conference. We kind of mix it up amongst our team of where we're going to be at what time. And because I run the Las Cruces Space Festival, which is going to be running 7th through the 10th of April, I'm going to be here in Las Cruces managing that part of the event. But there are plenty of opportunities to see me at various panels and discussions around the country. I was at the SpaceCom conference in January up in Orlando, Florida, and hopefully by the end of this year I'll be at a few more other conferences around the country as well. So people need to look out. There's some great events going on around the place, and I'm particularly excited to hear about your Yuri's Night celebrations, because I always think that's a really fun one for people to get involved in.
It's they had an amazing vision when it started many years ago, and now with the general interest, it's growing in attendant the kind of people that go over there. It's no more just a kind of a space geek event. It's more of a future of humankind event, celebrating where we're going as a species. Alice, it was a pleasure having you today on the Future of Space. I'm so happy to learn that Spaceport is not just a kind of dusty little place in a desert of New Mexico, but it's a thriving community around the globe that is really shaping the future of our journey into outer space. So I think on behalf of everyone, big thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me on, Daniel.
We'll get all the links in the comments, and we invite everyone to go and learn more about Spaceport, the Cup, and all the educational program that they have. And we'll make sure that Alice gets her inbox even more overwhelmed than it is right now with requests to come and visit and participate. Alice, good luck with everything, and we'll see you soon on the road.
Thank you.